So we're looking at a story today that is unique to Luke's gospel, which means no other gospel shares it. It's only found in Luke. And it features a man named Zacchaeus. And this gospel is sometimes referred to, it's known as the gospel for short people. And that's because Zacchaeus was vertically challenged. He was short in stature. And I have great sympathy for him. Because even with shoes on, I measure up to the size of, let's say, 5'2.5", or maybe even 5'3", depending on who's measuring. And all my life, I've never had a growth spurt. Even as a child, I was short. I've just kind of gradually grown just a little along the way. So I've heard all the jokes. Claire, you're so short. You're so short that when a clever joke is shared, it goes way over your head. Claire, you're so short that when it's raining, you're the last to know. When it comes to short people, you've probably heard this one too. When it comes to short people, you better hand it to them, because otherwise they'll never reach it. Somebody, Melissa Finkley to be exact, was flagging me down before the service. I mean, I thought it was urgent. She was so, enthusiastic. And she came up to me and she's like, I was looking at the title of your sermon, and I just want to thank you for dedicating your sermon to the first row of the choir. Give them a hand. Now, if you take offense to any of this, don't. I'm in it with you. And I'm just trying to hammer home my point. The gospel for short people. If you grew up, Parma already alluded to this, but if you grew up like I did in Sunday school, you probably remember that catchy tune. Zacchaeus was can you sing it with me? Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He climbed up in a sycamore tree, for the Lord he wanted to see. Okay, that's enough. I got to get us out on time. I was thinking, I can't get that tune out of my mind. Every time I study this passage or preach it, just all week long, it was running in my mind. And I thought to myself, if every story in the Bible had a catchy tune attached to it like that, we would all know our Bibles so much better. But Zacchaeus, he's not just short, he's rich. I'm talking a greedy kind of rich. Now, we've been in Luke's gospel all year long, so if you've been following along with my preaching or our preaching, then you know what Luke has to say about those who cling too tightly to their possessions and to their wealth. You know what Luke has to say when we ignore or neglect the poor or those in need. When we do these kinds of things, we wind up wanting. We wind up lost. L-O-S-T. Don't believe me? Then just ask. Just ask the rich man who ignored Lazarus, or ask the rich young ruler, or the rich fool, all of whom are featured in Luke's gospel. Now, if two strikes against Zacchaeus aren't enough, there's a third one. Zacchaeus is not just short in stature, he's not just rich, he's also what? A tax collector. And we are told he's not just a tax collector, he is a chief tax collector. Chief tax collector of the entire city of Jericho. And by the way, I was reading a commentary by Fred Craddock this week, and he says that chief tax collector is a term that's exclusive to Luke, another unique thing to Luke's gospel. No other, it's not just the only time it's mentioned in the New Testament, no other time in all of ancient Greek literature is this term used. And so the point of this author is to really make the point of how horrible, or at least horribly hated, this man Zacchaeus truly was. Because tax collectors in those days, we've touched on this already in the children's sermon, they were considered to be traitors. You have to remember that at this point in Jewish history, the Roman Empire was in charge, and Rome was imposing a tax upon all the people. And a tax collector would have been a Jew, probably, and we know, or we at least think, that Zacchaeus is a Jew because his name is borrowed from Zechariah, which is a Hebrew name. Zacchaeus means pure in heart and innocent. But he's anything but innocent or pure because he is collecting people's money. The way it worked in those days is Rome said, you need to collect this amount of money from every person. And once they did that and turned it into Rome, they were allowed to collect everything else for themselves, taking advantage of the poor and those in need. And so the common sentiment of these kind of people, the common sentiment in that crowd that day of Zacchaeus, would have been disdain. And not only that, the dirty, rotten scoundrel deserved to be hated. And that's how harsh it was. And that's the context for today's story. When Jesus enters the city of Jericho, he's just passing through it. You remember that travel narrative that I talked about so many weeks in a row? Your eyes probably just rolled back in your head. But here's the point. In Luke's gospel, the way it's structured, Jesus goes from Galilee to Jerusalem. And he's on this journey in between those two places, and it's 10 chapters long, so it's a big chunk of Luke's gospel. He's on his way to Jerusalem, where he will spend the last week of his life. He will be betrayed, arrested, and crucified, and eventually resurrected. But now where we are, as Jesus is in Jericho, passing through, is we're almost to the very end. We're not quite there. We got one more parable yet left to go. But we're almost at the end of that long 10-chapter journey. And this is the last stop, Jericho, before Jesus walks into Jerusalem. And so you can imagine it's an urgent time. You know, the heat's beginning to rise. The stakes couldn't be higher. And so he's not planning to linger in Jericho for all that long. He wants to get on with it, get on with his mission in Jerusalem. But he sees this man named Zechariah. And Zechariah would have been part of this huge crowd. He's in Jericho, all these people gathered round. And Zacchaeus is going to do what he does best. He's going to roughshod over everybody. He's going to run and get ahead of everyone. Don't know anybody like that, but you know what he's going to do next? He's going to climb up a tree so that he can get a look at this famous rabbi named Jesus. And you remember we learned this when we studied the prodigal son, a grown man in those days at that time in history. You would have never seen a grown man like the father and the prodigal son do what? Run, much less climb a tree. Zacchaeus is behaving like a child. But when Jesus gets to the tree, Jesus looks up and says, he calls him by name, Zacchaeus. And Jesus says an odd word for Jesus, hurry. There's an urgency to this. Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. And so Zacchaeus hurried down the tree, and he welcomed Jesus gladly. And all the people in the crowd who saw this happening, what did they do? Grumbled. That's right. They grumbled, which is interesting to me because usually in the Gospels, when people grumble, they're religious big deals, Pharisees and scribes. But it's the crowd this time who grumble. I was also thinking, if Jesus were coming to your house, how would you prepare? Now, Zacchaeus doesn't have much time. I mean, he's just got to welcome him on the spot. But let's imagine for a moment that Jesus is going to come to your house to stay. What would you do? Would you clean the sheets? Would you vacuum? Would you clean the bathrooms, even the toilets? Would you, would you cook? Would you plan your menu? Would you think it through? Would you have it catered? My point is, what would you do? How would you prepare? And what would you think if when Jesus, this famous rabbi, comes to town, passing through, he stayed at the tax collector's home? Shouldn't Jesus stay at the bishop's house, or at least the preacher's house, or the lay leader's home? No, Jesus stays at this man named Zacchaeus' home, and the people don't like it. They grumble. What on earth is happening here? What's happening is unbelievable. We can hardly get our minds around it. Look, note that word. Look, says Zacchaeus, as Jesus stands before him, and he's welcomed him. Look, half of my possessions, O Lord, half, I will give to the poor. And if I've cheated anyone, Zacchaeus says, I'll repay them 4 times as much. I'm not going to get you to pull out your bank account here, but are you giving that much to the poor? Zacchaeus is being very, very generous here. He's a changed man. His life has been transformed. This dirty, rotten scoundrel, he does what the rich young ruler cannot do in Luke's gospel. He relinquishes. He lets go of his wealth so that he can live. And Jesus says today, salvation has come to this house. And then Jesus goes on. This man too is a child, a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save whom? The lost. L-O-S-T. Again, Jericho is the last place, the last city that Jesus is going to pass through before he gets to Jerusalem, the cross. And as he's entering, now we're going to backtrack here to chapter 18. We're in chapter 19. We're going to rewind, if you will, to chapter 18. As Jesus enters into the city of Jericho, and he's with this crowd of people, this blind beggar hears that Jesus is on the way. And so he shouts, Son of David, have mercy on me. In Jericho, this blind beggar is in need of something. And so Jesus heals him of his sight. He's blind. And Jesus takes a moment and brings healing to the blind beggar. So what I want you to connect here is on the way into Jericho, the last spot before Jerusalem, the last week of his life, Jesus's. On his way into Jericho, he will heal the blind beggar, and on his way out of Jericho, he will heal a wealthy crook. And in both cases, the oppressed and the oppressor, they are saved. And I think what the author of Luke's gospel wants us to see and wants us to know here is that nobody, talking about honoring everyone today, no one is outside of God's salvation. Do you hear me, church? No one is outside of God's redemption and salvation. Last point, and I'll wrap it up. This blind beggar and Zacchaeus, they are as different as night and day. But what they have in common, what these two men have in common, has everything to do with seeing. Everything to do with seeing. The blind beggar wants to see Jesus. Lord, he says, I want to see. Zacchaeus, on the other hand, wants to be seen. You see the difference? This wee little man, a nobody who becomes a somebody by taking advantage of other people, wants what everybody else wants. Zacchaeus wants to be known. He wants to be seen for who he truly is, a child of God. And so he scurries up the tree to see Jesus. And see him Jesus does. Jesus calls him by name. He looks beneath his crooked ways, and he calls him a child of Abraham. And when this happens, he's changed. So I think, the way I interpret this story, is that what transforms Zacchaeus, what changes him, is that Jesus respects him. Jesus honors him. Jesus holds him in high esteem and is able to see beyond all his broken ways. He's able to see who he truly is. Greg Boyle says this: people change when they are what? Cherished. People change when they are cherished. And so, church, we are the body of Christ. We are, as Parma said earlier, the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. And so our second core value in this congregation is to what? Honor who? Everyone. We do this, and not because it will be easy. We do this not because it's popular. We don't do this so that we can grow our church in number or financially. We do this because when we learn to see as Jesus sees, when we learn to see as Jesus sees, we remember that God's salvation in and through Jesus Christ is for everyone and all. The good, the bad, the short, the tall, and everyone in between. So be it, and so it is. Amen.